In Jerusalem, under the shadow of an ongoing war, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a speech that was equal parts history lesson, rallying cry, and diplomatic appeal. Addressing a large delegation of American lawmakers, he sought to frame Israel's struggle against Hamas not just as a national defense, but as a battle for shared values with the United States. From the very beginning, Netanyahu set a sober tone. Benjamin Netanyahu said, there they'll regroup, they'll recover, they'll rearm, and as they vow, they'll do it over and over and over again. So this is where we are right now, on the verge of entering Gaza and defeating Hamas and liberating our hostages. The Prime Minister's words were blunt. Hamas, in his view, is relentless, and only decisive military action can end the cycle. For Netanyahu, the war is not optional. It is an unavoidable test of Israel's survival. He then turned to the sacrifices of Israel's citizens and soldiers. Netanyahu said, "This has not been easy, not for our brave soldiers, not for our brave Israeli public, but they withstood it no less effectively than the British people stood up in the Blitz. That's exactly what we had." The comparison to Britain's wartime resistance was deliberate. Netanyahu wanted to evoke an image of Israel standing alone, under siege, yet refusing to break, much like London during the Nazi bombardments of World War II. It was a historical analogy designed to stir resilience, but also to connect Israel's plight to the broader Western story of endurance against tyranny. Yet, for all his talk of courage under fire, Netanyahu made clear that Israel is not alone. He emphasized the enduring friendship with the United States, highlighting the bipartisan nature of American support. He said, "We enjoyed the support of the United States. We enjoyed your support. You're the biggest delegation of legislators that have ever come to Israel, and I thank you for coming here to stand up with Israel." Applause filled the hall. For Netanyahu, this moment was not just about optics. It was proof that Israel's fight has powerful backers abroad, even as criticism grows in other parts of the world. Netanyahu added, "Democrats and Republicans alike, we value and cherish your support, and there is an active effort to erode it." This warning set the stage for the next section of his speech, a pivot from gratitude to caution. The Prime Minister framed the current struggle not just as a war on the ground, but also as a battle of narratives worldwide. He accused foreign powers of orchestrating an international campaign to isolate Israel. Netanyahu declared that effort to besiege Israel is orchestrated by the same forces that supported Iran. Iran's effort to put a military siege on us and ultimately choke us. We were able to break loose from that siege, and we will have to do several things to break loose from this siege that is organized by a few states. One is China and the other is Qatar. It was a striking moment. By naming China and Qatar, Netanyahu pointed directly at two states with significant influence in global politics. China, a rising superpower with growing stakes in the Middle East. Qatar, a Gulf state that has hosted Hamas leaders and played a central role in ceasefire negotiations. Netanyahu continued, "They are organizing an attack on Israel's legitimacy in the social media of the Western world and the United States. We will have to counter it, and we will counter it with our own efforts. I think that's rule number one." To Netanyahu, this was more than an information war. It was part of a coordinated campaign to weaken Israel diplomatically, isolate it economically, and erode its legitimacy in the eyes of Western publics. From there, Netanyahu shifted his focus to Europe. He argued that Israel's allies on the continent, though often supportive, are being pushed into hesitation by internal political dynamics. He said, "Western Europe has large Islamist minorities. They're vocal. Many of them are politically motivated. They align with Hamas. They align with Iran. They pressure the governments of Western Europe, many of whom are kindly disposed to Israel, but they see that they're being overtaken by campaigns of violent protests and constant intimidation." The Prime Minister described European leaders caught between sympathy for Israel and fear of domestic unrest. According to him, this is what allows the so-called siege to tighten. But Netanyahu rejected the idea that Israel is truly isolated. He said, "Some of them have stopped weapon component shipments. Can we get out of this? Yes, we can. We're pretty good at producing weapons like intelligence. We share both with the United States. By emphasizing self-reliance, he suggested that Israel's innovation and production capacity can offset external pressure. At this point, Netanyahu lightened his tone, using humor and everyday examples to illustrate Israel's global impact. Turning to the delegation of lawmakers, he pointed at the phones in their hands. Netanyahu said, "Do you have cell phones? Any of you have cell phones here? You're holding a piece of Israel right there. You know that? I mean, a lot of the cell phones, the medicines, the foods, you eat cherry tomatoes. You know where that was made?" The audience chuckled when he admitted his personal distaste for cherry tomatoes, but his point was clear. Israel, despite being a small nation under constant threat, has made outsized contributions to technology, medicine, and agriculture worldwide. He said, "I don't like cherry tomatoes, but it's an Israeli product, as are so many other things, and I think this serves the betterment of all mankind and womankind. I think that is Israel's unknown contribution. This moment was more than comic relief. It was an attempt to remind his audience that Israel is not only a consumer of American aid, but a partner whose innovations have shaped the modern world." Netanyahu circled back to the central theme of American support. He stressed that bipartisan solidarity remains vital, but he also spoke about the need for independence. He said, "We cherish the fact that we have the constancy of American support despite the attempts to erode it, and will continue to work to make sure that that continues on both sides of the aisle. It's very important for us." At the same time, he made it clear that Israel is preparing for a future in which it cannot rely exclusively on others. Netanyahu said, "We will eventually create the independence that we need. So those in Western Europe who think they can deny us things will not succeed. We can break this siege, and we will." This dual message, gratitude for allies but determination for self-reliance, is a familiar Netanyahu theme, echoing his long career of warning against dependency. As the speech drew to a close, Netanyahu elevated the stakes beyond Israel's immediate security. He framed the war as part of a larger struggle, one that touches not only his country, but the wider democratic world. Netanyahu said, "This is not a battle just for national interests, not just for our..." Though the transcript cuts off here, the meaning was unmistakable. Netanyahu was signaling that Israel's war against Hamas and its resistance against pressure from Iran, Qatar, and even Europe is not only about defending borders. It is, in his telling, about defending civilization itself. The speech left its mark for several reasons. It was bold in its accusations, naming China and Qatar directly. It was emotive in its comparisons, invoking Britain's blitz spirit. It was personable in its humor, poking fun at cherry tomatoes while celebrating Israeli innovation. But above all, it was a performance carefully tailored for its American audience. For the lawmakers in attendance, Netanyahu's words were both a thank you and a reminder. Israel sees itself as a frontline defender in a larger civilizational struggle, one that requires continued US support. In essence, Netanyahu painted Israel as embattled but unbroken, besieged but resilient, reliant on allies, yet determined to be independent. His words echoed the determination of a nation at war, a nation unwilling to accept isolation and unwilling to back down. And with that, the Prime Minister concluded, leaving his American audience with both applause and a heavy sense of shared responsibility.